He is the perfect example of the Renaissance man, an artist whose paintings are the most famous in history, a scientist whose notebooks predicted the future, a genius who, 500 years after his death, still defines the very limit of human potential. His name is Leonardo da Vinci. He gave the world the Mona Lisa's smile and the raw emotion of the Last Supper, works of art that would change culture forever. But at the same time, he was designing flying machines, diving suits, and robotic knights. He discovered how the heart's valves worked and mapped the human nervous system with an accuracy that would not be seen again for centuries. He was a painter, an engineer, a musician, an anatomist, a geologist, a cartographer, and a botanist. But how? How could one person in one lifetime master so many different fields? Was he born with a superhuman brain, a gift from the heavens that the rest of us can only dream of? Or was there a method to his genius, a way of looking at the world that anyone can learn from? What was the secret that allowed him to see the universe in a way that no one had before? The answers are hidden in the thousands of pages of his private notebooks. And understanding them doesn't just tell us about a man who lived 500 years ago. It teaches us how to be more creative, more observant, and more innovative in our own lives. This is the story of how a boy from a small Italian town taught himself to become the greatest genius in history. The story begins not in a grand palace, but in the rolling hills of Tuscany, in a small town called Vinci. Leonardo was born in 1452, and right from the start, he was an outsider. He was an illegitimate child, born to a local notary and a peasant girl. This status, which could have been a huge disadvantage, ended up being his greatest gift. Because he was illegitimate, he wasn't expected to follow his father into the family business of being a lawyer. He wasn't sent to a formal university to learn Latin and study old, dusty books. He was left alone. He was free to wander the countryside, to watch the birds fly, to see how water swirled in a river, to study the petals of a flower. His education came not from teachers, but from the world itself. He didn't learn what other people thought was true. He learned to look for himself. This childhood forged the first, and most important, principle of his genius, an insatiable, borderline, obsessive curiosity. He called it curiosità. This wasn't just a mild interest in things. It was a deep, burning hunger to know why. Most of us are curious as kids, but we grow up and it fades. We learn to stop asking so many questions. Leonardo never did. He carried a notebook with him everywhere he went, and he filled it with questions, seemingly random, everyday questions. Why is the sky blue? How does a woodpecker's tongue work to avoid breaking its brain? How do clouds form? What does the inside of a human being look like? He would write down to-do lists that were just long strings of questions. Describe the tongue of the woodpecker. Calculate the measurement of the Sunday. Ask the master of arithmetic to show you how to square a triangle. His curiosity knew no boundaries. To him, there was no difference between art and science. A swirling vortex of water and the curl of a human hair were born from the same universal laws, and he wanted to understand them both. He saw the world as one giant, beautiful mystery, and his life was a quest to solve it, one question at a time. He once wrote, "The desire to know is natural to good men." For Leonardo, it was more than natural. It was the very air he breathed. This constant questioning, this refusal to accept anything without understanding it first, was the engine that powered his entire life. It's the starting point for everything he would later achieve. He didn't just look at the world, he interrogated it. But just asking questions isn't enough. Anyone can wonder why the sky is blue. The next step is to actually go out and find the answer for yourself. This is where Leonardo separated himself from almost everyone else of his time. And it reveals the second principle of his genius, dimostrazione. It means a commitment to test knowledge through experience, experiment, and a willingness to challenge authority. In the 1400s, Knowledge was mostly based on what people had written in the past. If the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle said it was true, then it was true. If the church said it, it was true. People learned from books, not from life. Leonardo thought this was ridiculous. He couldn't read Latin or Greek well, so he was shut out from the world of the educated men. Again, this turned out to be a blessing. He called himself a disciple of experience. He trusted only one authority, his own eyes. His notebooks are filled with this idea. He would write things like, "To me, it seems that those sciences are vain and full of error which are not born of experience, the mother of all certainty." He was basically saying, if I can't see it, test it, or prove it myself, I won't believe it. This was a revolutionary way of thinking. When he wanted to understand how birds fly, he didn't just read old texts. He went out and bought caged birds from the market, just to set them free and watch them take off. He studied the mechanics of their wings, the way they caught the air, the subtle movements of their feathers. He dissected them to understand their bone structure and muscles. He did the same with everything. When studying anatomy, he didn't just rely on the ancient medical texts of Galen, which had been the standard for over 1,000 years and were filled with errors. He got his hands dirty. He went into the morgues and hospitals of Florence and Milan and secretly dissected human bodies, something that was dangerous and forbidden. He wanted to see for himself how the human machine actually worked. He was a scientist a century before the scientific method was even a concept. He learned by doing, by experimenting, by failing, and by trying again. This commitment to real-world evidence over accepted dogma is what allowed him to make discoveries that were centuries ahead of his time. He proved that curiosity is powerless unless it's paired with the courage to find your own answers. So, Leonardo was curious, and he was a hands-on experimenter. But all the experiments in the world don't matter if your tools of observation are dull. Leonardo knew his most important tool wasn't a chisel or a paintbrush, it was his own senses, and he worked tirelessly to sharpen them. This leads us to the third principle, sensazione, the continual refinement of the five senses, especially sight, as the primary way to understand the world. Leonardo believed that sight was the most important sense. He called the eye the window of the soul. He practiced a philosophy he called saper vedere, which means knowing how to see. Most of us look, but we don't really see. We see a tree, but we don't notice the way the leaves are angled to catch the most sunlight, or how the branches get thinner in a predictable mathematical pattern. Leonardo saw all of it. He trained his eye to be a high-definition camera, capturing every subtle detail. This intense power of observation is what made his art so revolutionary. Before Leonardo, painted figures often looked flat and stiff. Leonardo brought them to life. Look at the Mona Lisa. The reason her smile is so mysterious is because of a technique he perfected called sfumato, which means smoked or blurred. He understood that in real life, lines aren't perfectly sharp. Edges are soft. Light blends into shadow. He noticed that the corner of the human mouth is the first part of a smile to move. So he deliberately blurred the corners of Mona Lisa's mouth in soft shadow, leaving it ambiguous. Is she smiling or not? Your brain can't quite decide, so she seems alive, her expression changing every time you look at her. That's not just art, that's applied science. It came from decades of knowing how to see. He trained his senses to perceive reality with a clarity that no one had ever achieved before, and then he showed us what he saw. But the more he looked, the more he realized that not everything was clear-cut. The world wasn't a collection of sharp lines and definite answers. It was filled with ambiguity, with mystery, with things that were hard to pin down. And instead of getting frustrated by this, he fell in love with it. This reveals the fourth, and perhaps most subtle, principle of his genius, sfumato, or the willingness to embrace ambiguity, paradox, and uncertainty. This comfort with uncertainty is incredibly rare. Most people crave certainty. We want clear answers, black and white rules. When we face a problem we can't solve, we get anxious. We give up. Leonardo was the opposite. An unsolved problem was an invitation. A mystery was a playground. He was famous for his ability to hold two opposing ideas in his mind at the same time. He designed terrifying war machines for his patrons, while also being a vegetarian who loved animals so much he would buy caged birds just to set them free. He was fascinated by the mechanics of the body, but also by the mystery of the soul. His biggest public failure was a project in Florence. He was commissioned to paint a massive mural of a famous battle, the Battle of Anghiari. It was meant to be his masterpiece, even bigger and more complex than The Last Supper. At the same time, his great rival Michelangelo was commissioned to paint a mural on the opposite wall. All of Florence was watching. Leonardo, ever the experimenter, decided to try a new painting technique. He was inspired by an ancient Roman recipe for wax-based paints. He thought it would create more vibrant colors. He set up the mural and began to paint. But the paint wouldn't dry properly. He brought in large braziers of hot coals to try and bake the colors onto the wall. It was a disaster. Instead of drying, the heat caused the wax in the paint to melt. The colors began to run, dripping down the wall in a terrible, ugly mess. His masterpiece was ruined. He was publicly humiliated and eventually abandoned the project, leaving the wall a wreck. These failures would have crushed a normal person. To be humiliated on such a public stage, to have your greatest ambitions turn to dust, is a heavy burden. But this is where Leonardo's genius shines through again. He didn't see failure as the end. He saw it as data. Every failure was a lesson. His notebooks show that after the paint disaster, he went back to studying chemistry and the properties of oils and pigments. After the river project failed, he continued to study hydrology and fluid dynamics, producing sketches that are still admired by engineers today. His failed flying machines led him to deeper and deeper studies of aerodynamics and anatomy. He treated failure as just another part of the process of discovery. This resilience, this ability to learn from mistakes and keep going, is what allowed him to navigate the uncertainties he so willingly embraced. And it was in this space, between art and science, between success and failure, that Leonardo discovered his fifth great principle, arte, scienza. The idea that art and science are not separate disciplines, but are deeply intertwined. He believed that to be a great artist, you had to be a great scientist, and to be a great scientist, you had to think like an artist. For Leonardo, art was a tool for scientific investigation, and science was a tool for creating more beautiful art. They were a feedback loop. His most famous example of this is the Vitruvian Man. It's a drawing we've all seen. A man with perfect proportions standing inside a circle and a square. On one level, it's a beautiful piece of art. But it's also a rigorous scientific study of human anatomy and geometry. Leonardo was trying to solve a puzzle posed by the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius: how to make the proportions of a human fit perfectly into the two most perfect geometric shapes. He used his knowledge of anatomy, his skill as an artist, and his understanding of math to create this single, iconic image that perfectly fuses the two worlds. This blend is everywhere in his work. When he was commissioned to paint The Last Supper, he didn't just start painting. He spent months, maybe even years, on the scientific study of emotion. He would walk the streets of Milan, following people who had interesting faces, observing how they expressed anger, sadness, love, and betrayal. He filled his notebooks with sketches of different facial expressions. He wrote about the psychology of the apostles. He wanted to capture the single dramatic moment when Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." The painting is a masterpiece of psychological drama, and every gesture, every expression, is based on his scientific observation of human nature. At the same time, his scientific work was always infused with an artist's eye. His anatomical drawings are the greatest proof. He dissected more than 30 human bodies over the course of his life, a dangerous and gruesome task. But the drawings he produced are not just cold clinical diagrams. They are works of breathtaking beauty. He drew the layers of muscle on a shoulder as if they were flowing fabric, He drew a fetus curled in the womb with a tenderness that is deeply moving. He saw the beauty in the science. He understood that the systems that make a river flow are the same systems that make blood flow through the heart. He saw the elegant artistic design in nature's engineering. This ability to think across disciplines, to use his artistic eye to see scientific patterns and his scientific mind to create art, is the core of his unique creativity. Imagine the scene. The rest of the city is asleep. By the flickering light of a candle, Leonardo stands over a cold, lifeless body. The smell of death is thick in the air. For most people, this would be a horrifying experience. For Leonardo, it was the ultimate act of discovery. The church had strict prohibitions on dissecting human bodies. The medical knowledge of the time was based on the writings of Galen, a Greek physician from the 2nd century who had only ever dissected animals. As a result, European medicine was based on a flawed understanding of human anatomy for over 1,000 years. What he discovered was revolutionary. He was the first person in history to accurately draw the human spine with its correct curve. He discovered how the aortic valve in the heart works, using his knowledge of fluid dynamics to build a glass model and watch how blood actually flowed. He drew the nervous system, the muscles, the bones with a detail and accuracy that was simply astonishing. His drawings of the skull and brain are so precise they could be used in a medical textbook today. He was literally rewriting the book on human anatomy, all in secret, all by himself. His intense study of the human body didn't just focus on its internal mechanics. He was also keenly aware of the body as a whole, as a living, moving instrument. This points to the 6th principle of his genius, corporalita, the cultivation of grace, ambidexterity, fitness, and poise. Leonardo understood the mind-body connection long before it was a popular concept. He was also famously left-handed, but he trained himself to be ambidextrous. He could write with one hand while drawing with the other. In his notebooks, you can find his famous mirror writing, writing backwards from right to left. Some think he did this to keep his notes secret, but it was more likely just a natural result of being a lefty writing with an ink that would smudge if he wrote normally. This physical dexterity was a reflection of his mental dexterity. So, Leonardo had mastered curiosity, experience, the senses, uncertainty, the fusion of art and science, and the connection between mind and body. But there was one final piece to the puzzle, the one that tied everything together and elevated him from a brilliant man to a true genius. This is the 7th and final principle, connessione. This is systems thinking, the ability to recognize and appreciate the interconnectedness of all things and phenomena. This was Leonardo's superpower. He saw the world not as a collection of separate subjects, but as one integrated system. He saw patterns that no one else could see because he wasn't trapped in a single discipline. In his notebooks, you'll find a page where he has a drawing of a swirling vortex of water right next to a drawing of a woman's curly hair. For him, they were the same pattern, created by the same laws of physics, just expressed in different materials. He would write about how the earth is like a living body. The rocks are its bones, the soil is its flesh, and the rivers are its veins. He saw that the branching pattern of a river delta looked just like the branching of blood vessels in the human body, which looked just like the branching of a tree. He studied geology to make his landscape paintings more realistic. He studied botany to understand the structure of plants, which helped him understand the structure of buildings. He studied music and the mathematics of harmony, which gave him insights into the proportions of the human body. So, how do you become a genius like Leonardo da Vinci? The answer, hidden in his life and his notebooks, is both simple and incredibly challenging. It's not about being born with a divine spark. It's about cultivating a specific set of habits and a way of looking at the world. First, you must reignite your curiosity, curiosita. Start asking questions again, like a child. Don't just accept things as they are. Ask why. Carry a notebook. Write down the things you wonder about. Let your curiosity run wild across every subject imaginable. Second, become a disciple of experience, dimostrazione. Don't just take someone's word for it. Test things for yourself. Learn by doing. Make mistakes. Get your hands dirty. Trust your own eyes and your own experiences more than you trust what you read in a book or see on a screen. Third, sharpen your senses. Sensazione. Really look at the world around you. Practice saper vidya, knowing how to see. Pick an object and study it. Notice the details, the light, the shadows. Listen carefully. Pay attention to the textures, the smells, the tastes of the world. Wake up your senses. Fourth, learn to embrace uncertainty. Sfumato. Be comfortable with ambiguity and paradox. Don't be afraid of the gray areas. Understand that the most interesting questions don't have easy answers. Be willing to live in the fog of the unknown, because that's where true creativity happens. Fifth, break down the walls between art and science. Arte, scienza. Look for the art in science and the science in art. Think analytically about creative problems and creatively about analytical problems. See the beauty in a mathematical formula and the elegant structure in a piece of music. Let your analytical mind and your creative mind dance together. Sixth, take care of your body, corporalita. Recognize the deep connection between your physical well-being and your mental clarity. Move your body, eat well, cultivate balance and grace. Your body is the instrument your brain uses to experience the world, so keep it finely tuned. And finally, see the big picture. Connessione. Look for the patterns that connect things. Think in systems. Read about subjects outside your area of expertise. See how the flow of traffic in a city might resemble the flow of electrons in a circuit. Understand that everything is connected. Leonardo da Vinci was not a superhuman. He was the product of his own relentless effort and his own boundless curiosity. His genius was not a thing he had, it was a thing he did every single day. He left us the ultimate blueprint, not just for creating masterpieces of art or inventing machines, but for living a richer, more observant and more creative life. He taught us that the greatest masterpiece we can ever create is our own mind, and the tools to build it are available to every single one of us. All we have to do is learn how to see.